Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're going to get started in just a moment. As people are coming in, if you wouldn't mind putting your name in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from. We have an amazing international group gathered here today, and I believe we're probably having people coming from all over the world to listen to this important conversation. So as you come in, if you wouldn't mind, just put your name and your affiliation if you have one and where you're calling in from in the chat. And I will begin just by welcoming everybody to Climate Week 2020. My name is Vanessa Warheit, and on behalf of the Climate Safe Pensions Network, I am super excited to welcome you to the fourth in this week's series of global conversations on finance, risk, and investing in a low-carbon future. This series is co-sponsored by a really big coalition of organizations, including the Center for International Environmental Law, Divest New York, Fossil Free California, Friends of the Earth US, Mass Divest, Reclaim Finance, Stand.Earth, Urgewald, We Can International, 350.org, 350 Silicon Valley, and the Climate Safe Pensions Network. And if you, I'm trying to change my slides, if you missed our earlier events this week, you missed out because they were pretty amazing. They covered topics like using pension funds as levers for climate action, the role of indigenous rights and women's leadership in the movement for fossil fuel divestment, and the effects of COVID-19 and the federal bailouts on the fossil fuel markets. But good news, all of those have been recorded, and we will be posting the videos soon at 350siliconvalley.org. We will send all registered attendees a link to watch all of those later at your convenience. So our last Climate Week event after today's will happen later today, actually this evening, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 4:30 p.m. Pacific, if you're here in the United States. If you're in Europe, it'll be in the middle of the night. We apologize. It's a group of lawmakers from across the United States sharing legislative strategies to protect public pensions here in the US from climate risk. And that panel will be moderated by US Congressional Representative Sean Casten of Illinois. And details and registration links for that are at bit.ly/Climate Week NYC 2020 at that link on your screen. Note it is all lowercase. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. This event today is being recorded. Good, it is being recorded. And as I mentioned, all the videos in this series will be posted on the 350 Silicon Valley website. So I am really excited for this particular panel today. We have an amazing group of speakers. You're in for a real treat, especially given the news that's been coming out of a lot of places today around coal investing. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce today's moderator, who will be Ashish Fernandez. Ashish is the head of Climate Risk Horizons. It's a research outfit specializing in financial and economic analysis of the Indian energy sector and the broader risk that climate change poses to the Indian economic system. Before that, Ashish worked with Greenpeace over the last decade on national and international coal campaigns. He comes to us today from Boston, Massachusetts. And Ashish, I will stop sharing and I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Vanessa. It's really quite an honor to be here and to have this impressive array of speakers from different parts of the globe. So welcome. I just take a few minutes to introduce the speakers. We have Makoma Lekalala from South Africa. She's the 2018 Goldman Prize winner and director of EarthLife Africa, an extraordinary grassroots organizer on the front lines of environmental justice issues in South Africa. Leanne Govindsamy, who manages the Corporate Accountability and Transparency Program at the Center for Environmental Rights, also in South Africa. Effa Schukking, the founder of Urgewald, which has been doing kick-ass financial campaigning long before it became cool, I often tell Hefa that one of my first introductions to financial campaigning was reading a small news item in India about how they had blocked funding for one of the dams in the Narmada River. And this was back in the 90s. She will be talking about the global coal exit tool that Urgwald has developed and how fiduciaries and campaign groups can use it. Then we'll have Lucy Pinsoff from Reclaim Finance, who has been the linchpin for a lot of the amazing finance work coming out of Europe in the last few years. And she'll take us through Reclaim Finance's coal policy tool and how both investors and campaigners can use it to cut through the greenwash really and drive real change. And lastly, we'll have the insider's perspective from Sylvain Vanson from AXA, the group head of climate and environment at AXA. And he's going to give us the insider's perspective in terms of what does it take to move a fiduciary and what the results for AXA have been in terms of value chain following their coal and fossil fuel announcements. So to start, I'd just like to frame the discussion. We have a mixed audience, Vanessa tells me, of both climate and finance campaigners, as well as fiduciaries and investors. I think largely US and Europe based, but we do have some presence from the global South, which is great. We have people approaching this from both the moral and ethical perspective of the climate crisis and its impacts, which are all too real, as well as the financial perspective in terms of delivering adequate and safe returns on portfolios. Not all of us have financial or economic degrees, and I, for one, did not pay too much attention while earning mine. So we'll try and keep the jargon to a minimum and keep as much time for questions and discussion as we can. We'll start off with a round of 4 to 5 minutes per panelist, starting with Hefa. And please feel free to use the chat box to start putting questions down for the discussion session to come later. So over to you, Hefa. Can you tell us a bit about the GCEL and how it's being used and can be used?
Okay. I just want to warn you at the beginning, in case you hear strange noises in the background, it's my dog snoring. So I'm going to introduce you to the Global Coal Exit List over the next 5 minutes. When Urgwald was campaigning on the coal investments of the Norwegian government pension fund in 2014, we had a revelation. Up until then, we had assumed that financial institutions know exactly who the coal industry is. Well, they don't. Most investors have no idea which percentage of a utility's power generation is coal-fired, or which companies are developing new coal projects. And to be fair, this is actually not always easy to figure out. At first glance, no one would expect that Limor Resources is developing coal mines in Madagascar, or that Shine Energy is building a new coal power station in Australia. Our revelation was that NGOs should grab the high ground and not leave it up to investors or to business information providers to define who the coal industry is. This is why Urgwald began compiling the Global Coal Exit List, a public database that provides statistics on all the different types of companies operating along the thermal coal value chain. This covers not only coal miners and coal power companies, but also coal traders, coal to gas companies, coal plant manufacturers, coal transporters, the whole shebang. To give you an idea on the magnitude of difference this makes, in 2014, Norges Bank, which administers the Norwegian government pension fund, said, we hardly have any coal investments, maybe around 267 million euros. Now, these were the pension fund's investments in so-called pure play coal miners. But if you counted its investments in coal-based utilities, in coal to gas companies, coal traders, coal plant developers, the picture looked very different. According to our own study of the Norwegian government pension fund's portfolio, coal investments were at 8.8 billion euro. That's 32 times as much as the pension fund's manager had estimated. Now, to compile the Global Coal Exit List, we use 3 criteria. The first is a relative criteria. It tells you how important coal is to the business model of a company. Companies are put on the Global Coal Exit List if either their coal share of revenue or their coal share of power generation is equal to or above 20%. The second criteria is about the absolute size of a company's coal operations. It captures all companies that produce over 10 million tons of coal annually or operate a coal plant fleet of 5 gigawatt or more. And the third criteria is all about expansion. It captures companies that are building new coal power plants, developing new coal mines, or new coal transport infrastructure. And this slide really tells you why that third criteria is still very important, unfortunately. If we look back, ever since the Paris Climate Agreement was signed, the world's coal plant fleet has grown by 137 gigawatt. 137 gigawatt, that's equal to Germany's, Poland's, and Russia's operating coal plant fleets combined. And there's still over 520 gigawatt of new coal power plants in the pipeline. So what has been our experience with the Global Coal Exit List so far? Since it was published 3 years ago, over 200 financial institutions have become registered users of the database. And as you can see, there are plenty of big names here. But what is much more interesting in my mind than the total number of users is to take a look at some of the large investors whose coal policies have been shaped by the Global Coal Exit List. So for some very large players like AXA, Amundi, or Allianz, they have really based much of their coal strategy on this data. And today, investors representing US dollars 14 trillion in assets apply one or more of the 3 coal exit criteria to screen coal companies out of their portfolios. That's a pretty good record for 3 years. Now, the availability of information has a huge impact on the finance industry's willingness to act, but we shouldn't kid ourselves. Data will only get us just so far. Moving financial institutions to adopt good policies requires relentless campaigning. And wherever you do see good policies, it probably took several campaigns to get there. Now, the great thing about the coal exit list is that it allows us to precisely measure what an institution's coal policy covers or doesn't cover. So if we take a look at the coal policy adopted by BlackRock at the beginning of the year, we can see that it actually only covers 18% of the companies featured on the coal exit list. And if we look at CalPERS and CalSTRS, the picture is even worse. Their policies only exclude 12% of the companies on the coal exit list. That means that over 80% of the coal problem is still in the portfolios of these institutions. Now, all in all, there are around 750 parent companies on the coal exit list. Divesting these companies is not hard. Some of Europe's largest investors are already doing so, and you'll hear one of them speak later on. So our message to the rest of the finance industry is, the time for patient engagement with the coal industry is over. Get with the game. Otherwise, we'll all lose. Thank you.
Thank you, Hefa. That was really good. So I'd actually like to, since we're talking about a global coal exit list, and a lot of the movement, unfortunately, has come out of the US and Europe of late. I'd like to actually go to the Global South and to Makoma and Leanne for their perspective in terms of what it feels like on the front lines and what role finance can actually play in influencing grassroots campaigns. Guys, if you want to take it over.
Good evening. It's evening in South Africa, and thanks for having invited us to share with you. Indeed, the time it's now for us to switch over. Imagine 6,000 hectares of protected land where there are trees like baobab, mopani, and marula trees that have been woven into people's history, cultures, tradition, and also a source of food are expected to be uprooted. 180 of so-called heritage sources, including Stone Age sites, burial sites, and graves, are up for destruction. Ecotourism is under threat. Productive farming and food security also threatened. This is a project called Energy Metallurgical Special Economic Zone in the Musina Mercado in the Limpopo province next to Zimbabwe. This is a project that is geared towards, according to the environmental impact assessment, to bring about economic boom in the area. But that's whose boom is it going to be? This is only the boom for the financiers who are geared towards destruction of the whole area, uprooting people and violating human rights. Also, this project is going to add to 16% of South African carbon budget. That means all the commitments that South Africa has been making of lowering emissions are just going to be zilch. And all this, the project, the Energy Metallurgical project, it's an agreement between the Chinese companies, the Chinese government, and the South African government. And we've just heard that China says it has lowered its own emissions. But if they lower their emissions, why add on to other countries' emissions which are already threatened? But this is not new to South Africa, particularly that 80% of the coal industry is in the hands of large companies like your Glencore, your Sasol, your Exxaro, and South 32, which is part of BHP Billiton. And these companies are the ones that are driving business as usual of increasing emissions by ensuring that South Africa doesn't move away from coal-generated electricity, but remains there. Though experts have repeatedly said that South Africa has significant potential for the expansion of solar energy or renewable energy. But however, this is not taken seriously. What we see is that there's yet no sign of genuine accelerated switch to renewables. And I think what we're discussing today is something that really worries us, especially as activists on the ground. We always ask ourselves if these projects are going ahead of destroying our environment and violating our fundamental human rights. There is something that drives it, and what drives it is profit, and what drives that is investments that are made into these dirty projects. So we find that local and international development banks, private bank and financial investment that Leanne would speak much more to as to their role in supporting the South African coal industry and South African electricity generated, coal electricity generated, as to what their role has been and maybe some of the actions that we've taken as activists and as campaign Laugh After Coal. But we have just found that the local, it's evident that the International Development Bank, private banks, financial investments have a complexity in links between the destruction of the environment, infringement of fundamental human rights to water, food, good health, and decent accommodation. So it's time that we challenge and we request that the investment become the investment that would actually protect the environment and ensure that human rights are enjoyed by all over the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Makoma. That was really, really nice. Leanne, can I turn it over to you?
Thanks, Ashish. Evening to everyone. It's a very warm evening here in Johannesburg, and you know, Makoma has spoken quite compellingly about the heritage aspects of the impacts of coal mining and burning in South Africa. And it's interesting that today we are celebrating Heritage Day. So much of our heritage is bound up in our environment, in the way in which communities across South Africa live in and experience the environment. From a perspective of the Center for Environmental Rights, and in particular, as part of the Life After Coal campaign, which Makoma has mentioned, and I will post these links into the chat. The Life After Coal campaign is really a campaign between Earthlife Africa and Groundwork and the Center for Environmental Rights. And we are all working together in order to address both the mining and burning of coal in the different areas and spaces that we occupy. So as part of the CER and as part of the Corporate Accountability Program, we have a focus on the role of investors, the role of finance in propping up the coal system. And we also look at the direct impacts of coal mines and as well as the highest GHG emitters in the country and whether or not they have strategies to address climate risk. So I'll start off by looking a little bit at how we've looked at and analyzed the direct impacts of certain corporations. I've posted into the chat 2 of our latest full disclosure reports, which really focus on, firstly, in the full disclosure 4 report, looking at coal mining companies in a particular province in South Africa, in Mpumalanga, which hosts the highest number of coal mining companies in the country, and particularly the impact of those coal mines on water sources, on water in that area, in a very scarce, water-stressed area. One of the companies there being Exxaro, where, you know, according to the work that we've done, we were not able to find one single company that was fully compliant with its water use licenses. And this is quite astounding given just, you know, the experience that we've had in South Africa with Cape Town, you know, going to be one of the first countries in the world to run out of water, with some provinces in the Eastern Cape having not been able to prevent a day zero and have already run out of water. And it's interesting there where, you know, Exxaro, in response to our report, said, where we criticized how they were relying on very lenient provisions by our government, by our Department of Water and Sanitation, to continue with their non-compliant status. And their response was, well, if the government, you know, gives us a more lenient water use license, there's nothing really we can do. And that's a really interesting response, given that publicly, at least in the annual reports, they commit to best practices, they commit to going over and above in terms of addressing its coal impacts. So that I thought was quite interesting, given the work that have been done by colleagues on this call. One of the other interesting pieces of work that we've done is we've looked at the top emitters in the country, as well as the main banks, and assessed whether or not they have strategies to address climate risk. This has been quite interesting for us because we've been able to do research on these institutions in order to work, in order to inform the work of campaigners, in order to provide information that is able to challenge some of the kind of main responses that come through from some of these institutions. And just to conclude, you know, one of the more recent things that we've done as part of the Life After Coal campaign and with 350 Africa is that we've looked at National Treasury's policy and financing a sustainable economy, which policy will really guide financial institutions and hopefully be able to change them. But, you know, we levied heavy criticism in respect of how National Treasury was taking this forward. So I've tried to, in a very short space of time, give you a sense of what we are trying to do, both with private financial actors as well as state actors, in trying to help the country move away from coal. And I hope that that has been useful, and I look forward to the discussion going forward.
Thanks, Leanne. I already have a couple of questions, but I'll hold them for the discussion. Lucy, can you take us through the Reclaim Finance's policy tool and how that's playing out, and where does that leave us basically in terms of, we've seen a bunch of these policies, all sound very good, but I'm sure many people, just like me, are a bit cynical about some of them. So where does the tool come in, and how many of those policies are actually worth what they've written on?
You're on mute, Lucy.
We can't hear you, Lucy. I think you're on mute still.
No, still not.
You can hear me.
Good, we can hear you.
Good. Cool. Thanks a lot, Ashish. Could you maybe share the slide? So in the meantime, I can start. So as Ashish said, I am a French-based campaigner, and I have dedicated most of my time in the past 7 years to find ways to move finance beyond coal. And a pattern became very obvious to me. Financial institutions are extremely creative when it comes to integrating in their climate or coal commitments some wordings that might appear as details at first sight, but will completely undermine the claimed objectives of their coal policy. And everyone, the media, the stakeholders, must really be able to read and understand the fine print of their policy to truly understand what a policy achieve or fail to achieve. And it has become very, very easy for financial institutions to adopt a policy on coal and really take credits for it. And if you can go to the next slide. And since the Paris Agreement got adopted, the number of investors, insurers, and banks with policy guidelines restricting their support to the coal sector has been growing rapidly. And this feeds a growing narrative that coal is dead and financiers are staying clear. But it's clearly not the case. Research by NGOs, including Urgewald, shows that banks over more than $700 billion for expanding coal power sectors through loans and underwriting since between January 2017 and September 2019. And currently, you can find more than 215 financial institutions do have a policy on coal. So one will legitimately say that it's still better than to not have any policy on coal, and which is true. And currently, we can find that 216 top financial institutions, so some of the biggest banks, insurers, and investors, don't have any policy on coal at all. But even the reality check of these 215 policies on coal shows that their quality is really not good enough. If you can go to the next slide, please. So only 16 financial institutions do have a good coal policy right now. So the obvious question that you might ask is, what is a good coal policy? And it should be a policy that covers the whole coal value chain, exactly as Eva told us at the beginning of this time. And so policies that cover mining, but also the power sector and also the infrastructure. It should also be a policy that cover all financial services. And you will find a lot of financial institutions that are very quick to stop supporting some coal projects directly, but are still supporting the companies that are behind this project. And finally, policies should also combine both exclusion and engagement criteria in order to not only support the world in phasing out the coal sector, but also prevent the expansion of new coal plants or new coal mines. So we decided to show the reality of this situation and publish it online. So we published a tool, next slide, which is called the Coal Policy Tool. It looks like that when you arrive on the website. And basically it does three things. Next slide. So the first thing is that it enables you, and by who you, I mean clients, media, financial institutions, any stakeholder, to easily navigate the coal policy jungle. So you don't get fooled when you got a media articles titling BlackRock exits coal clearly, and Eva already said it, and I will touch upon this issue later on, but BlackRock did not exit coal. The tool is also here to count and compare and rate the policies adopted by financial institutions. So if you are a bank customer, you can look at the tool and decide which bank you want to give your money to. And if you are also an asset owner, you can also look and screen what are the best asset managers to take care of your money. And finally, the tools that may be one of the main goals, it's obviously to help financial institutions to adopt high quality coal policies that effectively contribute to a coal exit that is aligned with the 1.5 target. So the next slide. This is how the tool looks like, and I will encourage you to go on the coalpolicy.org website. We assess coal policy against 5 criteria. The first one only looks at the financial services that are provided at project level. So whether a bank or an insurer are directly insuring or financing a new coal plant or a new coal mine. The second, third, and fourth criteria look at the financial services provided at corporate level, at the companies behind this specific project. And the last one, look at how the financial institution plans to implement its strategy to fully exit coal and support the closure of existing coal assets. The scoring grid is very straightforward. It goes from 0 to 10. And we also added a color coding so one can easily grasp and compare the actors among each other. Finally, you can play around with a lot of filters. So from the worst to the best coal policy, and you can compare financial institutions, bank with other banks, or banks with insurers, US and French one, as you want. So next slide. So with this tool, you can really see, oh, that was this one, sorry. So the next one. So that's, you can see the tool here, and you can also see some of the stars behind, next to some of the names. And no, before, sorry, it was a full table. It's a coal policy tool. Yes, this one. No, okay, it's fine. Let's go to CalPERS and CalTERS. So with the tool, you can really understand why the pension fund CalPERS and CalTERS didn't really not do enough on coal. They were actually the first one, among the first one to adopt a policy on coal in 2015. But their policy is really, really minimal. They only have one criteria, which is an exclusion of companies that are based on the share of coal in their revenues, and it's only applied to coal mining companies. So that's explained why they got only 1 and 1 for one criteria out of the 5 criteria. And Fossil Fuel California just published a report that shows that CalPERS actually increased its coal exposure since 2017, with currently $6.5 billion investing in companies along the whole coal value chain. And among these companies, you will find Exxaro that Leanne speak about, and that is responsible of the crisis, the water crisis in South Africa, but you will also find some 59 companies that are still planning new coal plants. And CalPERS actually, that's the reality of their coal policy, but they did take a commitment, which is very funny when you look at this table, which is to align their portfolio with a 1.5 target. And one can really wonder, how do they dare committing to 1.5 targets when they are not doing even the strict minimum when it comes to coal, which has become the litmus test to judge how strong is the climate commitment of financial institutions. Next slide. When you go to BlackRock, you will find exactly the same scoring, even if BlackRock has better exclusion threshold than CalPERS and CalTERS, because they do exclude companies that are below the 25% coal exposure, when CalPERS and CalTERS will use a 50% threshold. But the big issue with BlackRock is, as I said earlier, a good policy is a policy that is applied to all financial services. And BlackRock only apply its policy to assets that are actively managed, meaning that the bulk of the assets managed by BlackRock that are passively managed, so more than 70%, are not covered by BlackRock policy on coal. So that's two examples of what the tool allows you to do. Unfortunately, if you look at the US financial institutions, you will see most of them are all in the red, and some of them are doing even less than BlackRock and Gapers and Galters.
Thank you, Lucy. That was great. A lot of information. Sylvain, over to you. We've heard from the outside. What's it look like from the inside?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Well, thanks for inviting me to this panel. I think I would agree with Hefa that we have, I would agree with you, Ashish, that we have a nice setup of kick-ass campaigners on this panel. So we're talking about coal divestment as if it was something which is sort of normal, and the whole idea is to make it more or less stringent. But actually, just a few years ago, this was simply not a discussion. Before I go into how it happened, let me just remind you that AXA is not only an institutional investor, but we're also actually an insurer. And as an insurer, we're at the forefront of climate change, especially the physical risks of climate change, the natural catastrophes. For example, we're being hit quite hard on some of our books with the current wildfires in California. Flooding is an issue. This is something that we know and we've been working on for many years. But at the time, 5 years ago, we were wondering how to, create a climate strategy that actually is meaningful and has an impact on the business. It actually bites into the way we do business. So we looked at quite a few ideas of metrics and initiatives, but quickly we realized that I think the word litmus test was just mentioned. It's true that coal is really, if there is one asset that will become stranded, one asset that clearly has no place in any kind of climate strategy, it's coal, for all kinds of reasons that we're all aware of on this panel. So when we put forth, so I work in the sustainability team, and I'm lucky to be working in a company that actually listens to the sustainability team. It's pretty clear it's not always the case. But at AXA, when we come up with ideas, they're looked at, they're weighed, and quite often we do end up implementing those proposals. So when we first came up with this idea that we should maybe divest from coal in early 2015, and we wanted to make this happen before COP21, because COP21 was being held in Paris, and we wanted to make sure that we could in some kind of way support a positive dynamic, political dynamic on COP21 6 months ahead of the actual summit. And we knew that the discussions with the negotiators were actually difficult. So we put forth that proposal. Of course, initially, as you would expect, because it was unheard of, this was not the ideal fund for the investment teams. In fact, many people around the table, typically risk management, investments, and so on, basically told us that it's never been done before, only by very small funds, not by mainstream investors like us. So it's got to be stupid. If it's never been done before, it's got to be a stupid idea. But we pushed forth and we spoke to the right people at the right moment, and this compromise was found. But then we end up with the idea that with the situation that Hefa touched upon, which is how to define coal. So at the time, the global coal exit list didn't exist. We had to use a commercial data provider with actually very low quality data, and we didn't know where to put the threshold. What is a coal company? So sort of intuitively we thought, well, a 50% coal, a company that derives over 50% of its turnover from coal, or of its energy mix, let's call this a coal company. Let's focus on coal mines, coal plants, and get rid of them before the end of 2015. So that's how we started this. We knew it would, create a little bit of waves, but we didn't think it would create that much of a shock. Initially, the reactions from the media, from peers, was very mixed. We had many peers saying, I don't divest, I engage. When you divest, you no longer have a voice and you can't nudge companies into changing, which is true, but go engage with a Chinese coal company that makes 100% of its business from coal. I don't know if this is very, this is maybe a little bit of a waste of time. And also we had trouble with some of our investors who started saying, well, don't entrust your money with AXA because they're doing funny things with it. They're no longer, you know, a responsible fiduciary, because at the time the whole idea of a stranded assets approach was actually really nascent. But we did this and it worked well. Quickly, some of our peers followed up with similar strategies, similar policies, and as we know now, this has become maybe not completely mainstream, but it's a fairly frequent decision, at least within European financial services players. Just a couple of years later, in 2017, President Macron decided to hold the first One Planet Summit, which was actually a 2-year anniversary of the COP21. And we thought, well, let's leverage this event and ramp up our strategy. We really made 2 big announcements here. We increased the threshold, well, actually, we lowered the threshold of our existing coal divestment strategy down to from 50% to 30%. Thanks to HEFA's great new list, the Global Coal Exit List, which had just started to be tested in 2017, we were able to add this great new criteria, which was coal development. We didn't have that criterion before. We only have the 30% or 50%. And this criterion was hugely helpful because we didn't realize that actually we might still be investing in companies actively developing new coal plants, actually a pretty large new coal fleets. And we were not catching those companies with our current or with our revised 30% threshold. So we added that guideline, we added that threshold and a couple of other thresholds to the list, to the AXA policy. And the third thing, which I think was very important that we did, we broke another taboo because, well, when we divested in 2015 with a coal share of revenue, we had a financial argument. The idea was that those assets were risky in the long run if coal constraints were to be imposed. You don't really have that when we speak about the coal development threshold, because those companies actually might be doing good business selling coal fleets abroad and are not really liable for future constraints on those coal plants. But then we added an extra layer and broke a third taboo, which is let's extend this to our insurance operations. Now, of course, here again, we had many people inside, outside saying insurance is different. It doesn't work this way. We can't say no to clients. It doesn't work that way. And so initially, of course, this discussion was difficult, but I think it shows that if it's difficult, it's because it does have an impact on the business. It's one thing to divest. You move assets from one portfolio to another. You let some debt lapse, you reduce your exposure on some equities and corporate debt. It's quite another thing to terminate existing client relationships, sometimes that you've been doing good business with some clients for 10 or 20 years. They have been, profitable, useful clients, and you have to say no when no other insurer is doing this. So you basically have to sit back and see this business go to your competitors. It looks a bit stupid, frankly, on the markets. So that was actually very difficult to implement. Nonetheless, we went ahead with the simple idea that we can't support through our insurance services companies that we've decided are not in line with the Paris Agreement and we've divested from. It's as simple as that. So that was an important move. And again, it opened the door for other peers to start doing this. I'm not saying they imitated us, but seeing one insurer doing it, it does trigger the possibility of others starting to implement it. I had many calls with my peers explaining how we proceed, hurdles, maybe mistakes to avoid. And just last year, 6 months ago, we ramped up again. So a third time our climate strategy, again, still using the Global Coal Exit List. We ramped up the thresholds, especially on the insurance side. We went a lot further by no longer just banning coal plants and coal mines, but actually clients as a whole, any kind of business when they breach our thresholds. So that again was a bit of a shock for the underwriters, and we had to bring a gradual implementation of that policy. But again, we can no longer support the car fleets or the office buildings of those companies that are still building new coal plants or having a high exposure to coal. So that has been a journey, and the way we modeled it, we've learned a lot along the way. We're happy to see that it's become somewhat mainstream. And it's no longer a difficult discussion. Now there's devil is in the details, and this is where Lucy comes in with the coal policy tool. I'm glad we have a decent score in there, but I know there's still a lot of things that we could do to increase our coal insurance and coal investment strategy. So this is still a discussion that we will be having. It's an ongoing discussion.
Thank you, Sylvain. That was really good. So I think we have a bunch of questions in here, but I'm going to be a little bit dictatorial. And since I'm the moderator, I'm going to ask my questions first. So Sylvain, Vanessa actually had a question for you as well. How did this whole initial pushback internally saying this is a stupid idea, was there any one key thing that broke through that? Is there anything that you would advise, at least the campaigners in the room, in terms of when they're approaching institutions, to make that process less difficult? And secondly, I don't know if you would be able to talk about how this has impacted or not impacted the bottom line, or is it too early to tell? Has the company, have there been impacts negatively or positively, or is it basically been managed, and is it neutral?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, the sustainability team gets decent support from the top management of this company, and this has been going on for a long time. So support from the CEO, support from the chairman has been key. If you don't have that, a strategy like this, I guess, can't really happen. But you also need support from the people who will implement it, who will be hit by the actual new policy. So this is why we had to test impacts on our assets and on our underwriting books. The first coal divestment was a hit of 500 million euros approximately on our general accounts assets. But that doesn't mean, of course, you lose 500 million euros. It's assets that you could no longer invest in, that you need to sell. And the actual accounting impact on our assets, we didn't even model it. To be honest, I think it's actually quite limited. It's more an organizational headache for portfolio managers, because you have to have an exclusion list flying around, and it's a process to implement. So that actually takes time. On the underwriting side, when I add both our 2017 and our 2019 exclusions, especially as I didn't mention, but in the meantime, we acquired a very, very large American insurance company called XL Catlin. It's a very large commercial lines player. Commercial lines is the insurance of large projects, large companies. So suddenly our coal books ballooned significantly. We estimate that we lost around $115 million in premiums when we implemented the first 2017 policy. Those premiums are basically business that we could not renew. And we also know that, unfortunately, brokers sometimes no longer refer to us business that we could have supported, but they had a feeling that AXA was being complicated in the energy sector, so they'd better talk to our competitors. So that is a hit, especially in a business which is actually very competitive. It's tough to make money in the insurance business, especially in the property and casualty business. So losing $115 million is actually quite an effort.
Thanks. That's interesting. Okay, we've got a bunch of questions to go to, so let's start dealing with them. First one's to Heffa on the global coal exit list, differentiating between different coals, met coal versus thermal power coal. How does the exit list approach that?
The exit list only covers thermal coal. If you're looking at met coal, you would have to use a different sort of metric than we've been using. You'd have to look at how much are steel companies, for example, investing in alternative technologies that are now there. You'd have to look at the efficiency, CO2 emissions of steel plants, this kind of thing. It just wouldn't have fit in the same kind of list. The fact that met coal isn't covered by the coal exit list at this time doesn't mean that the finance industry shouldn't also be acting on met coal and putting pressure, especially on steel producers. We've been asked time and again when we're also going to produce a list on met coal. We're not ready for that right now, but we are thinking about an oil and gas exit list for next year.
Great. There's a question on CalPERS. CalPERS claim they cannot exclude a divest because they need to stay engaged. So there's a whole engagement versus exclusion issue. Who wants to go for that?
Yeah, I can take it if you want. Or maybe Sylvain, you can also speak, but maybe just as a start, if you look at the engagement report of CalPERS and CalTERS, they are using this argument to keep engaging, investing in companies such as Glencore or Duke that are responsible of human rights violation and very deep pollutions in the US. And clearly when you see the wildfires going on right now, it's really outrageous. The only what can do, there is no requirement for a company to stay in CalPERS portfolio, except one, to just develop a bit of renewable energy. So as soon as a company will do a bit of renewable energy, they can keep digging coal and producing coal and building new coal power station. And that's why, as I said, CalPERS and CalTERS are still investing in many coal plants developers. So engagement, yes, is needed, but it's needed, as Sylvain said, you don't waste your time with some companies that are still expanding the coal sector and that don't show any effort in exiting and closing their existing assets. So the engagement should only be for companies that do have some coal assets and show that they are trying to transition, but obviously, because it's a question of time, they still need to be pushed to transition quick enough.
To be honest, I find that the debate of engagement, not divestment, is one of the dumbest debates I've ever seen. And I really mean it. Obviously, when you have a divestment policy and you implement it, you are a much stronger engager when you turn to the companies that Lucy just described. So those that are borderline and that need a nudge from investors, from campaigners, to continue going down the right route. But there's no need to waste time with companies that show no kind of commitment whatsoever along this road. And of course, the day those companies that we've divested from suddenly go below the divestment thresholds, well, sure enough, they can be rehabilitated. So I agree that usually this is more a delaying tactic. In my experience, on coal, it's more a delaying tactic than a genuine approach.
Thank you. There are a couple of questions on how this relates to small investors in terms of using these tools and strategies. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know if anyone else does. And does anyone know of carbon-free index funds that can be useful to small investors?
I can answer the first bit. I mean, for small investors, I think especially the coal policy tool, it's a great instrument because you can look up, what is your insurance company doing? What is your asset manager doing? What's your bank doing? And actually, small investors, especially if there are many small investors doing this, can be really important, even if you find that your institution has a low score on the coal policy tool. You could go to your bank or your insurer and say, look, I want you to use the global coal exit list. Otherwise, I'm going to have to move my money or I'm going to have to move my contract. And we increasingly actually have financial institutions who are contacting Orgavolt to get the global coal exit list because they're saying our clients are asking for it. our clients want it to be applied. And it's one of the most important ways to move financial institutions, because they do care what their customers and clients want.
So in
Maybe
the
to answer the second one, if you want, there are a lot of index right now that are performing much better than the traditional one. There has been some research showing that the fossil-free ETF by State Street has been performing by 3.6% the SP 500. So sustainability pays, that for sure. Even if, as Sylvain said, you can lose business on the direct insurance or direct banking business. But in terms of an investment, you can definitely make money out of sustainability. However, when it comes to carbon or coal-free ETF, I guess if I convince you that the devil is in the details, and it will, what coal and how coal is being defined will matter. So you will really need to look at, when an index is saying it's coal-free, what does it mean exactly? And I doubt it covers the whole global coal exit list.
So you guys are going to come up with a rating list for sustainability indexes too, right? Next year.
That will be part of the plan.
So there's a very good question on how do we ensure that developing countries aren't becoming the last places where divestment occurs. Have you seen from the divestments that have happened that companies are more willing to divest from projects in the US and Europe as opposed to the global South? Yeah.
I think it's more a question of sort of the national, what we call the national champions. If I look at the French financial sector, they've been very good at getting out of coal companies internationally, but companies, I mean, big French utilities that still have a certain degree of coal business, that's much tougher. And in Germany, we see the same thing. The last companies that German investors who are beginning to divest want to get out of are the big German coal companies. And often criteria are made in a way to avoid having to divest important clients from your own country. So I don't know that, you know, I wouldn't in general say that divestment is happening slower. But what we do see is that if I think of the example of Japan or South Korea, their you know, investors are, it's harder for them to take the first jump into a decent coal policy because they're trying to hang on to their national clients. And that just means it takes that much more pressure.
Thanks, Eva. I'm going to try and talk to the next question, which is about Coal India and how do we get people to divest from. So Coal India has actually seen some divestment from, among others, the Pension Fund of Norway when they made the announcement. And they have a lot less investment from some of the more ESG focused investors, but they've still got a lot of international investment still. And I think that's a real problem for Coal India because they haven't really internalized the fact that their business basically has to go out of, they have to shut down completely in maybe 20 or 30 years. And there's no evidence that they're thinking of that. So the impact of the divestments that have happened on that particular company have been fairly negligible so far. And so the short way of saying is there's no real answer, I'm afraid, to that question. There's a very specific question for Sylvain. Has AXA ever spoken with Liberty Mutual? And if not, would you reach out to them proactively to share your experiences?
I talk to peers very often, but I don't remember indeed reaching out to Liberty Mutual. Be happy to have that conversation with them. I also talk a lot with our clients, with our brokers around those policies. I've noticed that, you know, we had a coal divestment policy for 2-3 years before we implemented underwriting restrictions. And it's only when we started to have underwriting restrictions that this really rang the alarm with the coal companies. That's when we started getting phone calls. They wanted to understand what, why we were doing this, what was the thresholds, were there exemptions, could we maybe do a little breach for them, and so on. I didn't get that when we did the divestment. So my intuition is that there's still, fair amount of liquidity on the markets for coal companies. However, when insurance underwriting flows get smaller, it's much more complicated for those companies to operate and to place all of their risks. So it becomes more complicated for them to operate.
So on that, I don't know if Lucia, Heffa, you've had experience of getting more of these peer-to-peer conversations going and how that works or doesn't work, and if that's something that we should be focusing on.
One thing for sure is that the first question I get is from financial institutions is, what are others doing? So it does work. It clearly does work, but sometimes financial institutions are a little bit shy to talk to competitors. So we are also here to facilitate the discussion, or at least just let them know how it's working. And I think one thing that is really, it's not only about the policies, it's how the policy got implemented and got adopted. And usually especially from the US financial institutions, we get a lot of, I'm sorry, I can't do that. My boss will never let me do it or push it. So we got a lot of people who don't even try. And I think that's the main reason why we are also failing right now, is that a lot of people are trying to find excuse for not taking actions. Either it's because the competition will be too hard, or because the boss or the hierarchy will not let it go. And that's the main thing from US financial institutions that are also very hard to talk to. Compared to financial institutions in Europe that are actually talkative and open for exchanges with NGOs or with their peers. And in the US, it's actually very hard to get the discussion going, which also explains why, and I guess if I can tell you more, but I guess not a lot of US financial institutions are actually using the global coal exit list compared to in EU. Because they don't go to get the data outside. They think it's only inside that they can take all the tools that they need to do. And it's very typical from BlackRock.
Using a tool built by NGOs is quite a big step, culturally speaking. Even at AXA, we had to massage management quite a lot. And we had to show that Heffa's list was actually very well built, was actually better researched than commercial data providers, and featured, even more interesting filters. But this NGO stamp on the list was a hurdle for sure, and I'm sure it's even more of a problem in America.
Although I have to say we have a lot of registered users from the US. We have BlackRock and PIMCO. We had BlackRock call us up 3 times to say, can we get the list more quickly? So there are people in these financial institutions who are using that list, but it doesn't mean that they've adopted good policies. But I think that the coal exit list actually, even below the policy level, that it is having a big impact on individual decisions as well, which we simply can't measure. Policies are places where we can actually measure and see the impacts that we're having. I just wanted to make one more remark on sort of the peer-to-peer conversation. I actually think it's one of the very most important things that needs to happen. My observation from meeting with many, many different financial institutions from many different countries is that invariably, independent of how absolutely appallingly poor and unambitious their policies are, each financial institution who's done something thinks they're the leader. And I see this all the time, and it's because they're only looking within their own country. They have no idea what's happening in other places that, have progressed, where the conversation has progressed much, much further. So for the past few years, I mean, Lucy's organization and Orgaval, we've begun organizing sort of roundtables in different countries. And it's very powerful to be able to bring in someone like Sylvain or other representatives of institutions who are further along, and to not just hear from NGOs, but to actually hear from peers. This can be done, and we've had a good experience doing it. So I think that's very powerful, but I also think that, you know, for certain institutions that are just absolutely entrenched and recalcitrant, I would really wish to see more progressive investors resorting to shareholder resolutions and these types of measures, investors in financial institutions to also begin pushing them. I mean, we saw during the last shareholder season that investors put forward a shareholder resolution at Mitsui, one of the big Japanese banks, and that had a huge impact to see, oh no, our investors are starting to become active. Matter of fact, Lucy and I have a phone call tomorrow with Mitsui.
That's a nice segue to Steve's question, which is, can investors go beyond divestment and start threatening to short sell? Doesn't that give them more leverage?
I don't know. We haven't engineered the our divestment strategy that way, but I guess it could happen. I'm not aware of anybody doing this.
I think that's one to think on. Does anybody have experience with the CA 100 asset managers?
Yes, we're part of CA 100. Many asset managers and asset owners are part of CA 100. So CA 100 is a very large, well, pretty large coalition of investors dedicated to shareholder engagement on a fairly long list of large carbon footprint emitters. And as any large organization, the consensus it reaches sometimes is not the most ambitious one that you would want it to see, but it's because it's a compromise between all kinds of investors that, you know, that have a different appetite. So I think it's been very useful so far in the sense that it has brought a pretty large asset base, so a lot of assets under management to promote some approaches. But we also know that other more focused activist-led initiatives in terms of shareholder engagement can be very helpful as well.
So I'm just conscious of time. I think we go for another 5 minutes. I think there are a couple more questions. I have a couple, which is, one is to do with the whole index fund excuse that institutional investors use. What is the best response to that? And secondly, what can divestment and policy campaigners in the global north do to make the work they're doing more impactful in the global south, in places like India and South Africa, to bring about change over there, both in terms of the institutions in those countries, as well as in terms of the campaigns in those countries? So I don't know if Hefa or Lucy want to talk about the index fund issue first.
I think Lucy does.
Not really. I'm not an expert in index, but as I said, I mean, some index, low carbon or cool low carbon index are performing better than the traditional ones. However, I do believe that index are completely antagonistic with the need to track financial services to the right place, because when you do when you do opt for index investing, you actually opt for something which is in pilot mode, so that you are not in capacity to decide very carefully and very closely. So I unfortunately we can expect passive management to increase because it's cheap, but we should clearly not go for that. And I know it's something very hard to say in the US, where it's a main type of management, which is not the case currently in Europe. Yeah, I think I have said it was
I agree with you, Lucy. We don't do index, we do we don't do index, we do active. But you're right. There's nothing wrong with index investing in terms of cheaper fees and so on. But clearly, when you go passive, when you go index based, you're copying yourself out of any kind of voice regarding your role in society as an investor. You're just following the world's economy. So there's clearly an opposition between index investing, I think, and trying to have an influence on the way the world should be and not is.
Maybe just to add, Crédit Agricole asset management branch, Amundi, does have a very good coal policy, and their policy is not implemented to the passively managed assets. So currently only they do have 10% of their assets are passively managed, which is not a lot, but considering the size of Amundi, it's quite significant. And they do plan to implement the policy to a share of their passively managed assets to bring it to 40%. But to bring it to 40% only not today, not tomorrow, but in a couple of years. So again, that clearly shows that even when there is a will, just to implement a policy to the index will take a lot of time, and we don't have a lot of time.
Thanks. Leanne, would you like to address the question of how campaigns in the US and EU can boost work that's happening on the ground in the South?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of work going on in terms of assessing financial institutions, and there's a lot of expertise that has been developed in terms of how to conduct these investments across various standards, various principles that are being developed. And, we did one particular assessment, and it was very evident that we needed a lot more in terms of either kind of the economic analysis or other types of expertise in order to make our work kind of more meaningful. So I think there's definitely a lot that could be done in terms of sharing of information and kind of the cross-pollination of that kind of information in order to make assessments here more meaningful, therefore making our engagements with those institutions much better. We were able to challenge them in a much more robust way and draw from the experiences that have been had in terms of how to move away from coal through different types of divestment, etc., but also what the incentives are, which I think is often lost to some of our financial institutions, particularly the public financial institutions. Given that the reasoning behind continuing with coal is, look, development here looks very different to development in other parts of the world, and we've got a huge gap, to kind of meet and so if there's a way to be able to address those kinds of concerns and rather make them like real opportunities, that would be really fantastic.
Yeah, one of the things that I keep coming back to is also we've had a lot of bank policies, some better than others, but from global banks, and many of these banks have partners or branches in the developing world. And are there ways for us to leverage that better? So if we're talking about really global change, rather than it coming from the North. Yeah, Hefa?
Yeah, I think that's really an important point. And I just also want to say that there's some amazing divestment campaigns going on in the South. If I think of the Philippines, there's a huge campaign where the Catholic Church is participating and calling on Philippine banks to divest from the coal industry. And it's having real impact because national financial institutions, they often do play a role. I would still say that, the finance stick, it's not used enough by NGOs, North or South. I mean, the tendency as an NGO is always either you go protest to the government who has allowed companies to do dirty things, or you go to the companies. But it's sort of a roundabout way to go to the financiers of the companies, but it's actually one of the most effective campaigning routes. And in terms of the global banks, I mean, a bank that I think it would be a great target bank for a campaign in the South is a Standard Chartered from the UK, because really 85% of their business is in emerging markets. Their headquarters is in the UK, but hardly anybody, you know, if you talk to people on the street, most of them don't really know Standard Chartered. And that would have a lot of impact if there was campaigning also on global banks in emerging economies.
Yep, definitely something to, there's just one unaddressed suggestion, more than a question, is creating a short index fund which holds all coal emitters. That's beyond my ability to envisage how that would work, but I think that's something to think about. I think I'm conscious that we are 15 minutes over time. So
to go back to the discussion we just had on campaigning, I think really keep at it. Campaigning works. You know, we might hate it along the way when we're being criticized, but deep inside we know it has to happen. You know, not much would have happened without campaigning. I'm not saying nothing would have happened, but not much would have happened. And what would have happened might also have been wrong-headed and definitely not ambitious enough. So campaigning is useful. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you, Sylvain. We will take that pat on the back where we can get it. Just like hand back to Vanessa now. This has been really good. We could have gone on, obviously, as I think everyone realized. But this has been really useful and inspiring. Thank you, everyone, participants as well as panelists. Vanessa, back to you.
Thank you so much. Oh, I am so deeply grateful to every single one of you that has been participant in this, and also every single one of the folks who are still on the line, even though we've gone almost 20 minutes over. Clearly, there's a lot of content here, and I'm going to take what Leanne said to heart, which is that we need more cross-pollination. We need more of these conversations to happen. I'm deeply grateful to Sylvain for single-handedly sort of representing the fiduciary perspective. And I think there's going to be a lot more conversations to come. I know that at the Climate Safe Pensions Network, we're actually very interested in fostering more of the conversations that Hefa mentioned among fiduciaries so that they can learn from each other and see who the real leaders are and develop a path forward. So thank you again to everybody. Big thanks to Lucy for developing such an incredible tool. And to Makoma, I am so sorry, Makoma is having technical difficulties with her camera. Makoma, can you turn on your audio and say goodbye to all of us and wish us all well? Can we hear your voice one more time? I'm gonna unmute you in case, there she is.
Thank you everyone for this webinar. I think I would agree with Haifa and Lucy that it's quite important that national champions spearhead divestments, as particularly from the northern divestment for the South. I think we've seen this happening, particularly with the work that Lucy had done around Eskom Medupi, and Haifa also had been contributing around Eskom Medupi, that you were able to highlight these issues around the financial backing of these projects. And we learned a lot along the way. And this is the tool that we also use now. And this is part of what the project that Leanne is heading. But however, from our side, I think what is much more important is for us to be able to get activists, people who are at project sites, to be aware of this kind of strategies that can really assist in them protecting their environments, but also assisting to check when there's environmental impact assessments, whether any due diligence has been done, and whether the companies or whoever the investors are have got environmental and social safeguards at least adhered to, though we know that that does not exist, but at least it puts some pressure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a safe and wonderful evening wherever you may be. And this has been recorded. This will be posted online at 350siliconvalley.org if you want to go back and dig in a little bit more. And we'll be back soon with more. And join us tonight, 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Those of you in South Africa and Europe, you're off the hook. It will be in the middle of the night. But for those of you in the US, we've got a great panel this evening on legislative strategies to help push this forward even farther. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.